So welcome. My name is Andrea. I'm your host for this evening. With me, I have Summer, who will be introducing herself momentarily. We make up a very small portion of the Juris Education team, and we're here tonight to give you a free workshop on how to prepare for the April LSAT. Just before we kind of move into the meat and potatoes of tonight's discussion, just a couple of housekeeping rules, so to speak. First and foremost, this is always the number one question we get. Was this recorded, and will we receive a recording? Granted, that's two questions, but still, number one, yes, absolutely. This webinar is recorded. You will receive a recording in your inbox within a day or two. In terms of how long we're running tonight's discussion, the hope is 1 hour. If we do go a little bit over, because we love to leave some room at the end for Q&A, we are open to that as well. But if you do have to drop off, no worries. We got your back with the recording. So what are we talking about tonight? So effective study techniques and what that looks like, mastering logical reasoning, mastering reading comp strategies, insider tips from a top scorer, and then that Q&A that we spoke about. So we have a lot going on tonight. Before I pass it off to Summer, I know there's a ton of new faces in the crowd tonight. So whether you're joining us for the first time or you've been here before, I'm going to say this many times, we're incredibly grateful that you have given us a chance and that you're here and that you want to learn a little bit more about the April LSAT. As mentioned, we're Juris Education. We are a globally recognized law school admissions consulting firm, offering comprehensive support from test prep to law school admissions and then even bar exam tutoring. We do have a 94% acceptance rate. Our students get into the top law schools in the United States. Last cycle alone, our T14 acceptance rate was 34%, which is almost 6 times higher than the national average of 5.7%. We are good at what we do, and we absolutely love doing this. So what we do is we believe in starting the law school application as early as possible, which is why we offer something called pre-law advising and profile development. Essentially, this focuses on building each student's professional cover letter and resume to highlight their most meaningful experiences. We also help candidates boost their academic transcripts and GPA, find stellar internships, create a timeline for LSAT prep. We do all of this with one goal, and that's to get applicants accepted into their dream law program, whatever that may be. So then we have our private LSAT tutors who assess each student's strengths and weaknesses. This then helps create a structured study plan for the days, weeks, and months ahead leading up to the test date. We definitely tailor our approach to each student's unique needs and schedule. So this could look like providing the right lessons and assessments as they become familiar with the test content, strategies, and format. On average, we do see a 12-point increase for 45 plus hours of tutoring, and we do offer a score guarantee of 165 plus with our 60-hour program. We've done all of this. What do we next? We help shape an outstanding candidate. We do this through creating the perfect application. So this looks like the creation of a well-balanced list of targets, safety, and reach schools. We also help build strong letters of recommendation and resumes. And then we have our admissions counselors who are also essay writing experts, and they'll sit with you and help you brainstorm, outline, and edit your supplemental essays and personal statements until they are perfect. Our goal is very clear. It's very simple. It's to build the perfect candidate and application. We absolutely use every tool in our skill set to ensure the products we create stand out from the rest. We're excited to get this process started. We look forward to your consultations, and I'd love to pass it over to Summer to introduce herself before we speak a little bit more about the April LSAT.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for spending your afternoon with us. Just a little bit about myself before we talk about the LSAT. So my name's Summer. I'm living in California right now in San Diego. I went to undergrad at Chapman University in Orange, California. It's a small-ish liberal arts college. I studied philosophy and sociology as a double major. And while I was there, I played lacrosse on the NCAA team. I was really involved with Greek life. I did different clubs and organizations like student government. Oh, yep, Disneyland is right around the corner next to my school. Yeah, so then I knew I wanted to be an attorney for, ever since high school. So I kind of had an idea of what it took to get there. And I knew I had to get really good grades in undergrad and, of course, do really well in the LSAT. So I spent a lot of time preparing myself in undergrad to build a really strong resume as one part of it, but then also study really hard for the LSAT. So I'm what they call a traditional student. So I went straight from K through 12 through undergrad and then straight to law school. So I didn't take any breaks. If you're not a traditional student, that's totally fine. I work with all different types of people who are either changing their careers or maybe took a year or two off, or go all the way through like I did. So there's lots of different paths to get there. I ended up doing pretty well on the LSAT. I studied for about 4 months, which is, I feel like, a very good amount of time to take to study. And I ended up getting offers from lots of high-ranked schools, but I decided to go to USC for my JD. What I will say about getting a really good LSAT score is that opened the door for me to get full rides at lower ranked schools, where I was able to negotiate a higher scholarship at USC, which was really, really awesome for me. So, for example, ASU, which is another incredible law school, gave me a full ride. So I took that offer, presented it to USC, and said I really, really wanted to attend, but the cost of law school is just so outrageous. So I was able to help negotiate with my offer, and that was due in part to a good LSAT score. So that's a little bit about me, but we'll move on. If anyone has any questions about my journey to law school, or what I'm doing now, or my undergrad, please feel free to type anything in the chat, and I'm happy to talk about that.
So Summer, I'd love to throw something in for our audience. I know that you got into USC through like a substantial program-long scholarship. But do you want to tell them about the fact that you also became one of the youngest students they've ever actually accepted?
Yeah, so when I was in undergrad, I just took a ton of units at a time. So some semesters I was taking like 18 to 20 units to finish early. So I graduated undergrad when I was 19. And then, 19. And then I started law school when I was 19 as well. So I was taking the LSAT when I was 18. It was really challenging and really scary being one of the youngest in the room always. But I wouldn't trade it for anything. And I love what I do now, which is, it's pretty special. So I am one of the youngest people to have graduated from USC and passed the bar on the first try, which was really awesome.
And you still are. Just want to throw that out there. I'll give it back to you, but I thought that was really
thank you. I saw a question which I can get to later.
Yeah, we can get to that to the Q&A.
Sure, we can save that for later. All right, so I guess the most effective way to study for the LSAT is really just making sure you have a plan from the very beginning. So making sure that you kind of work backwards from where you want to go. So for example, if you want to apply to law school before December of this upcoming cycle, build a schedule around that. So if you're taking the LSAT in April, obviously this doesn't really apply, but if you're kind of planning ahead for the next cycle of applications, and you might want to think about, starting from where your destination and then kind of working backwards. So if your deadline is, let's say, just for example, December, you want to take the LSAT maybe in October or November, and then work backwards and make sure that you structure your studying to give yourself anywhere from 2 to 4 months of just hammering in the best material that you can practice to get a good score on the LSAT. I would say definitely identify a set of drills that you can expose yourself to. So the LSAT, both of the sections have types of questions, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But if you can identify those types of questions and categorize them, drilling those questions, maybe if it's like a set of 5 every day or a set of 10 every day, just to really understand exactly what those questions are asking, you'll be able to master those categories a bit quicker than just doing them all together. Another thing that works for a lot of people, again, is repetition and pattern recognition. So by identifying those types of questions and really just hammering them in, you're able to just get better at them quicker, and that's exactly what you want to do. And then finally, you want to simulate test conditions. My little brother is actually taking the LSAT in June, and I've told him that, you want to get consistent with studying, and it's silly. He's gotten so regimented about taking the test that he'll even wear the same outfit when he takes the test, take it at the same time, eat the same breakfast, take it in the same room that he's going to be taking it in June. So if you want to be that intense, you can do that. But I think just creating the same environment every time is good enough. But I really recommend that you do that because it just gets you to remember and feel like comfortable in that environment when you actually take it for the first time for real. And then we want to study smarter and not harder or longer. So I think building that study plan and working backwards from your destination is really the most efficient way to hold yourself accountable, but also to kind of remind yourself where you're going with studying. Another thing that I really recommend is if you know that you're getting a certain question wrong, to target that area so that you can improve. So if you know you're always getting fallacy questions wrong, I recommend that you just identify those questions and keep working on them and understanding why you're getting those wrong. And then practice tests. I think it's important to take practice tests, but I think that you shouldn't take too many practice tests. If you're taking a practice test every weekend and you're not seeing an improvement in your score, it's probably because you're not really taking the time to review the things that you got wrong in order to understand how you could perform better the next time you take the practice test. So maybe you want to take a practice test once a month if that works better for you. You definitely do not want to be taking them every weekend or once a week or twice a week. It's just way too much. So make sure you space those out so you can, take the time to improve those categories of questions like I mentioned before. So a couple steps to boost your score over time. So the number one that I've already kind of talked about is take time to analyze and practice drill sets to pinpoint the skills that the question is asking you. So make sure to set aside those questions, especially the ones you're getting wrong, to make sure you know how to do them right the next time. And I see your questions, by the way, in the chat, and I'll get to them at the Q&A for sure. And then another way to boost your score is to utilize active review methods like question and blind review journals to find patterns. So what this means is, again, taking questions or trying to answer questions without knowing the type of question. So for example, if you're, again, looking at a fallacy question, taking time to identify that it is a fallacy question without your study materials telling you that that's what it is. So making sure that you can identify what type of question you're looking at before you're already you're told what it is in your study materials. I think that's really important so that your brain identifies those patterns on its own. And then lastly, regularly assess improvement through practice tests and, of course, adjust the way you're studying as needed. So if you think that you want to set aside 4 hours a day to study and you're working full time or you're going to school full time and you say, okay, I want to go to school and focus on studying for school from 8 to 5, and then I want to study for 4 hours every single day, including weekends. That might not be sustainable for you. Maybe you want to take a Saturday off. Maybe you want to take Saturday and Sunday off. Maybe 4 hours is too many hours. Maybe it's not enough. That's something that you really have to check in with yourself on because you don't want to get burnt out before the test arrives. So just a personal anecdote, when I first started studying for the LSAT, I took it twice. And the first time around, I took it in September of, probably 2019. And I was just studying way too much. I was so burnt out that by the time the test came, I was just so exhausted. I was so over it. I was answering questions just not as focused as I should have been. And my score reflected that. So the second time around that I took it, I spent some time to just kind of chill out and not study however many hours a day I was doing every single day. I took days off. I tried to focus on my mental health, because a lot of taking the LSAT really is a mental game. I think two things to remember, especially, is one, anyone can learn how to take this test. If you're not a good test taker, that's okay. This test is really just so formulaic that if you learn how to identify the patterns in the questions and you know exactly what types of answers you're looking for, you're going to be fine. Anyone can do well on this test. And the second thing to think about too is just it's mental. So if you already go into studying for this test telling yourself, well, I'm not a good test taker, I've never been good at standardized tests, I don't know any lawyers, I don't think I can do it, if I don't do well on my diagnostic, I'm probably not going to do well on the real LSAT, you're already counting yourself out of the running. So you really have to believe, like truly believe, that anyone can take this test and anyone can succeed as long as you put the work into it. So you'll get out what you put in, which I think is so important to remind students that I work with and just really anyone I talk to about going to law school, is it's just all so mental. And that'll translate into law school. You might doubt yourself in law school. It'll translate into you taking the bar exam one day. And into your work life. So you got to just check that at the door when you go into study for the LSAT, because it is really challenging and it can really mess with your head for sure. Okay, so there are different question types, like I've mentioned, that you want to try to master while you're studying for this test. So the first type of question is called a strengthen and weaken question. It focuses on cause and effect relationships. And I guess the best answer is modify the argument directly. And they avoid extreme or unrelated choices. So at its very core, these types of questions kind of ask, if X, then Y, if Y, then Z, so if X, then Z. So it's kind of like a cause and effect chain of events that happen in these questions. Obviously, it's not that simple. They'll ask you, or they'll give you a prompt that's a bit more sophisticated than that. But you're trying to strengthen or weaken or identify the flaw in the argument. The next type of question is called an assumption and flaw question. Assumption questions fill the gap. So you essentially want to find the missing link between the premise and the conclusion of the prompt. So these questions expose faulty logic. Common patterns include circular reasoning and correlation versus causation. So in these questions are my favorite because it's kind of like a puzzle. You're trying to figure out what's missing in this prompt, like what is missing in what you're reading. How can you fill the gap with the answer? I think these questions are a bit easier to identify just because you're trying to find that gap. But yeah, I think faulty logic is a bit more commonsensical than other questions. So if you think about it like that, like using common sense to fill that gap, that might help you in answering those questions.
Hello, I am back. I just want to do a really quick check-in with our audience. We have a couple of questions in the chat, so I think this would be a really great time to answer them. But before we do, just as a little thank you, we wanted to offer anybody on this call a 10% off code for any one of our awesome programs. So whether you want to work with Summer or maybe you're interested in maybe not necessarily the LSAT, but law school admissions in general, we have a program for that too. We want to make sure that we support you in any way possible, which is why we have this little thank you. So 10% off, you scan that QR code, you would book a one-on-one with one of our awesome colleagues who'll be able to sort of answer any kind of questions you have about the program, talk about your goals, talk about what law school you want to go into if you know. there's a little bit of a process there, but we're always ready and willing, and we'd love to chat with you. Summer, first question is, what is the most challenging aspect of getting into law school outside of the LSAT?
It's a really good question. I think it's twofold. First, you want to make sure you do really well in school so that you have a high GPA, because the two biggest factors that law schools look at are your GPA and your LSAT score, and that's to let you into the door and also to consider you for scholarships. So if you're still in undergrad or if you're in a graduate program, make sure you really do well in your classes, and get as close as you can to a 4.0 if possible. And another thing people don't really know about, I actually help with JD admissions consulting too. So this is a tool that I tell my students to look at when they're applying to law school. But the Law School Admissions Council, LSAC, has a GPA calculator that you can use to see how your grades equate to their GPA point system. So for example, I went to Chapman University. We have the highest grade you can get is an A. We don't have A minuses, but the A and the A minus has a different number assigned to it at my university. So the way LSAC does it is they'll actually just take everyone's grades from Chapman and they change the scale for them to make it a level playing field for everyone. So USC has a different grading system. UCSD has a different grading system. So if you're curious to see what your GPA is through LSAC and what law schools will actually see, just type in like Google LSAC GPA calculator, and you can look up your university and see what your GPA would be on LSAC. And then the other challenging part about getting into law school, I think, is the soft factors. So your letters of recommendation, making sure you get good letters of recommendation from professors or professional contacts that you have good relationships with. That's really important. Also, your personal statement, that's really important. Why do you want to go to law school? That's your chance to show on paper why you're pursuing this. What do you want to be after law school? What do you want to do with your degree? What do you plan on contributing to the school while you're there? I think your personal statement, although it's technically like a soft factor, I really think that is so important. And I mean, admission counselors are people too, and they want to admit people that they think will be successful at their college. So using that tool to kind of tell your story is just so valuable, because that gives them a chance to see you outside of the numbers. Maybe you don't do as well as you want in undergrad with your GPA. You can explain, maybe you have a reason for that. Maybe you're working full time to support your family. Talk about that in your personal statement. So I think standing out is a challenging part, but it's definitely doable. And there's people like me that can help you, or workshop it with your friends, your family. Talk about your story to them and see how they react. That's another great way, free way to get a great personal statement as well. I hope that answers your question.
That's awesome. Thank you, Summer. And I think it's so beautifully said, right? It humanizes the entire process beyond numbers and statistics. They say thank you, or they say thanks.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
So second question, then we can go back into the presentation, because I know we have quite a few more slides and I want to make sure that we do allow time for Q&A, is do you have a recommendation with at home versus test center? Reddit has a lot of horror stories about proctors.
I love Reddit.
At home.
Yeah, I love Reddit, but I hate Reddit at the same time, because everyone has their own personal experience. So when I took the LSAT, I did not have the option to take it at home. I had to take it at a testing center, and I know now it's much more convenient because COVID kind of changed things. I would just ask yourself, would you prefer a controlled environment where okay, the proctor's there. You don't have to hold your laptop up above your desk, below it, show all the way around the room, there's less of an opportunity for them to find something wrong with your testing center if you take it at like a testing center and not at home, because they're setting up the environment for you so it's controlled. But if you feel more comfortable taking it at home, and if you think you're going to do better in a comfortable spot, then take it at home. If I was choosing to take it again, I would never want to take the LSAT again. It's not fun. But if I had to, I would definitely take it at a testing center, just because I know that it's going to be quiet. It's going to be proctored properly. I don't have to worry about them canceling my score because they saw a sheet of paper on the floor, or I don't know, who knows. So I would definitely take it at a center, but I think different people will say different things about that. But yeah, I hope that answers your question. Okay.
Oh,
all right.
Right back to you, Summer.
Yeah. So, okay. So moving on, just, so there are two sections on the LSAT excluding this essay that they have, but we'll talk about that. So the first section is logical reasoning. It accounts for 2 of 3 scored sections on the LSAT. So this section, if you don't already know, is centered around arguments, but the question types, again, have different categories. So the first category is identification. You're identifying the main conclusion, the role of the statement, or the flaw in that prompt. The second is interaction. Again, it's that strengthen and weaken question, or the necessary and sufficient assumptions. The third category is inference. So you're resolving the paradox in the prompt, or it'll ask you for something, an answer that most strongly supports the prompt. Prompts and answer choices are deliberately written in confusing and frustrating ways. I'm sure you know this. They want to confuse you. They want to throw you off. And they'll use really big words and really confusing language that people don't use in their everyday. So that's just something to keep in mind. If you need to sort of dumb it down when you're reading the prompt, that's totally cool. So if you see a big word like, I don't know, something that can be said in a much simpler version, just take that into account as you're reading the question and just kind of use your own words as you're reading the prompt. And these questions also focus on broad skill building. They're just not just on question type. So being able to quickly mentally translate the 4 LSAT English into modern English is key to all question types. So like I said, just translating it in your head as you go is really important if you don't normally use these huge words like they use in the LSAT prompts. Reading comp. So reading comprehension can be one of the most challenging parts of the LSAT because the prompt is just, or the passage that you read is just so long, and the passages can be about really anything. When I took the LSAT, I had an essay that I read on something super scientifical about biology and chemistry, and I did not understand a lot of the words they were using because they had to do with science. And the last time I had taken a science class was probably in high school because I was a humanities major. So you kind of have to learn to ignore the actual content, but look at the way that the structure of the passage is written. Sometimes they do ask content questions, but it's really just, you kind of need to understand the arguments within the passage. So as you're reading it, think about the author's goal. Why are they writing this essay? Why do we care? And there are different types of essay structures that the LSAT uses. So as you study, make sure you learn how to identify those essay structures so that you know exactly how to identify the correct answer. And another thing with the LSAT is you can actually highlight, and you can use, like, you can write down notes on the side. So as you're reading through the passage, if you want to take a note of, oh, this is what the author said here, or this doesn't make sense here, let me write this down, or this structure is interesting, write it down, that helps. Something that I think is super helpful is kind of like a hack, but not really, it's very simple. you can read the questions before you even read the passage. That's something that I did that was really helpful, so that I knew as I was reading the essay, okay, this is the question that they're asking. This is what I'm looking for. So as I'm reading it, I could just highlight, okay, this is what the question asked me, and I see it in the passage, I'm highlighting it or I'm taking note of it. But these questions are pretty difficult because if you're not a fast reader, you have to learn how to become an effective reader so that you only read the passage once or twice. So managing your time and avoiding burnout. So I think if you're taking the LSAT and you come across a question and you're just stuck on it, and you're stuck on it for 5 minutes and you can't seem to find the right answer, and you're watching the clock and you're like, oh my gosh, I've been on this question for 5 minutes, I don't know what to do. Should I stay on it? Should I move on? Just move on. You can move on and come back to it. It's better to just be able to hit all the questions that you're able to answer correctly and that you're more comfortable with than to just stay on a question forever and lose track of time. So that doesn't make sense. So make sure you allocate your time well, and you will learn how to manage your time as you practice the LSAT. So that's something that you just be aware of, is time management. But that's not something that you should worry about until later in your studying. So just, I guess, when you're first learning the LSAT, give all the time in the world that you need to answer the questions correctly. But as you get closer to the test day, you really want to make sure that you're doing it within a specified time so that you're able to get to all the questions and answer them correctly. And then the last thing is quality over quantity. So make sure that you're targeting your practice with fewer but well-reviewed questions. And it's, again, that just has to do with identifying those categories of questions that you're maybe not so good at, and really taking the time to target that practice to make sure that you get those questions correctly. Because if you're just mindlessly drilling all these questions all the time, you're never going to get better at anything. And then again, building endurance for test day. So make sure you maintain your focus. You practice the full length time test to train your stamina and concentration. Like I said before, aim to mirror your test day conditions as best as you can. If that's eating the same breakfast, wearing the same clothes, whatever you need to do to put yourself in that like game day mindset of taking that LSAT, do it. And then again, like I said before, manage your emotion. Calm down, take a breath. This is just a test. You're going to do fine. A lot of it is mental. And if you're nervous on test day, that just means that you're excited and you care so much about doing well on the test. So just lean into that and acknowledge that feeling is so normal and okay. And lots of people are feeling that with you, have felt it before, and will feel it in the future. So what sets top scorers apart from, the average test taker? So obviously commitment. This isn't something that is going to happen overnight. If you take a diagnostic test and you get a 134, you're not going to be able to study for a week and magically get a 179. That's just not possible. And the margin of people getting a 179 in the first place is just wild. So don't set that standard, or don't put that in your mind that you can just do this in a month or do this in a week or whatever. It's going to take a lot of time. Again, I recommend studying for at least 2 months. That's really on the low end. If you can try to do 4 months, I think that's a really good spot, or a good sweet spot for the LSAT. And if you want to get a 165 plus score, you're going to really have to take that time to identify those questions that you're not doing well on and learn how to answer them correctly. And that really does take time. It's not going to be overnight. It's not going to be practicing one day out of the week. It's going to be consistent practice over a long period of time. And then also you have to study effectively. So using high quality materials and test prep to prepare yourself for test day. You don't want to just use like, I know the free stuff online is really helpful, but maybe you want to buy an LSAT book to help you prepare, that has a lot of questions, not just the free ones online. I know they give you maybe like a small amount of them to work on, and then that's it. So make sure you get good test prep materials, so that you have that it sets you up well to study well. And then another thing is thoughtfully confronting your own mistakes. I think that's a tough one, and that's really mental. If you know that you're not super good at something, sometimes I think our natural inclination is to not do that thing anymore. And that's just really, that's normal. But it's something that you have to face. If you're not good at it, the only way you're going to get good at it is by practicing, and really being intentional about learning how to do better on those questions. And then lastly, emotional resilience. It's a mental game. This is time consuming. This is going to be exhausting, but it's going to be so worth it, because if you score above a 160 even, or above a 165, you're going to get a good scholarship at some law school in the country. So you want to, this is an investment not only for your, I guess, the ranking of the school you'll go to, but for your pocket as well. So you want to save yourself as much money as you can. And this is the first step in doing that. And if saving money is not your motivation, then going to a T14 might be, or going to a top 20 or a top 30. That's good motivation in itself. And then I guess my final thoughts here, again, this isn't going to happen overnight. You really have to maintain consistent effort and commitment while you're studying. Just stay patient. Remind yourself why you want to go to law school. And hopefully that can inspire you to keep working hard and keep studying, because there will come a point where you might feel really burnt out. And again, that's really normal. So just remind yourself, why are you doing this? Why do you want to go to law school? Find that why, and just have that at the back of your mind while you're studying. I think that can help people a lot. If things aren't working for you, maybe you're studying too much, maybe you're not seeing enough improvement, reevaluate your study strategy and focus on the things that you really need to improve on. If you're getting burnt out, take a step back. So that's why it's really important to give yourself enough time, because if you do need to take a couple days off, if you do need to take maybe 5 days off, it gives you the cushion to be able to do that and take care of your mental health, so that you're energized throughout the entire process of studying for the LSAT. And then finally, build confidence through preparation. I think that a lot of times people are fearful to take tests because they don't feel prepared. So if you're able to prepare yourself very, very well, you still will be nervous, but maybe not as nervous as you would have been if you just walked into the test knowing nothing. Just by coming to this, you're learning something. So that should give you some confidence, so that you're not kind of in the dark with your LSAT process. And then I think too, as much as it is important to take time to answer questions that you're not good at, it's also important to do questions that you know you are good at, so it gives you a confidence boost while you study. So if you're really good at strengthen and weaken questions, and you just are not good at some of the reading comprehension stuff, take a break from reading comp and just work on the stuff that you're good at for a second. So not only does that like cement it into your brain, how to identify the things that you're good at, but it also builds your confidence when you're seeing like, okay, I got that one right. I can do this. And then Andrea, if you want to take over.
Absolutely. So we're about to hop into the Q&A portion, but before we do, we would absolutely love to hear from you. Any sort of feedback that you can give us via scanning this QR code would absolutely be appreciated. What we do is we really do take this information back, right? So we take this information back to our team. We work on bettering our process, improving our sessions, coming up with new topics, Even this, for example, this webinar came out of a webinar feedback survey where someone said, I'd love to know, a little bit more about the April LSAT. They asked us a particular question, and that's part of this, right? So we want to hear from you. You will receive a follow-up with this as well. With that being said, let's hop right into the Q&A. There's already one question in the chat, and I think this is such a fabulous question. It's so Jules asked, do you have any advice for the LSAT writing sample?
That's a great question. So the LSAT writing portion is such a weird part of the test because it's not necessarily graded. It's kind of another, like, one of those soft factors that is taken into account by some law schools. Some law schools don't even really look at it, which is so odd. I think it's kind of like it's a weird section of the LSAT. I don't know. But I would say when you're writing that portion of the test, it'll be like a persuasive essay. So, for example, a prompt that I like to give as an example in helping people study is there will be this issue in a local town. One side is arguing that they should keep a library with books in it, like a physical library. The other side wants to put the library all online and only have ebooks. Write an essay taking a side and to try to convince the mayor to take that side. Do we want to keep the library or do we want to put it fully online? So really, you just have to go in knowing that you're going to have to persuade another side or persuade the reader or whoever it is. So really get good at writing persuasively, being able to identify the strengths of your side, but also the weaknesses of the other side, and also be able to argue against the strengths of the other side. I think those are pretty good tips, but for a fact that it's going to be a persuasive essay. Just make sure you choose a side and you're able to argue it well. I think that's the best tip I can get. And just know that if you don't do as well as you want to on that, it's okay. The other sections matter more.
Let us know if that helped. Next question. Fact or fiction? I love this. I think we need to come up with a webinar called Fact or Fiction and do an entire webinar about it. Fact or fiction? I've heard the LSAT writing sample is the lowest bar of the applicant's writing, and the personal statements is the upper bar.
I guess I'm not really understanding the lower bar versus the upper bar. Are you saying that law schools don't consider, like, is the lower bar their consideration of the writing sample is like, it's like down here, whereas the consideration of the personal statement is like way up here? Okay, so the lower bar of a person's capability in writing. Okay. I mean, this is going to be such a lawyer answer and you're probably going to hate it, but I think it really depends on who's reading the sample and your personal statement. Obviously, your personal statement is going to be that upper bar because you have all the time in the world to write it. You have all the time in the world to curate that experience for the reader. So it better not have any grammar errors. It better not have any punctuation errors. It has to flow very well. I mean, it should be the best writing that you put forth. But I don't really think that admission counselors look at the writing sample from the LSAT and say, well, this is the worst this person could possibly write because it's under a time constraint. I don't think that that's true. I think they look at it differently. I don't think that they look at it like that, like in the quality of your writing. But I don't know. I think it might depend. I've never heard of that before.
Awesome. So the next question, I got all of my LSAT prep books last year before they changed the format, removing logic games. Would I be fine still using those materials?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. Ignore logic games. You can use everything else because they're going to be the same types of questions. Don't get rid of your materials. Those are really expensive, really valuable, but just ignore the logic games.
Hopefully that helps. And if you'd like us to expand on any of these answers, please definitely let us know, and we can do that. Well, Summer can do that. Some says yes, very
Yeah,
expensive.
so expensive.
Yeah.
All this stuff is just, yeah, it is very expensive. Even taking the LSAT can be really expensive too, especially if you take it more than once, which is something I do recommend, by the way. I recommend taking it more than once, but I don't recommend taking it more than 3 times. That's something that's come up with some of the students that I tutor. Um, I know you're able to cancel your score, um, but law schools look very unfavorably at having more than 3 LSAT scores because they want to see that you've improved. And if you just keep taking the test and you're not improving, then that's not going to look good. Let's say you take the test the first time, you get a 156, and okay, the second time you typically do better because you've done it before, you've gotten the hard part over with, your first time taking it, you're going to do better. So, for example, I took it the first time, I didn't do as well as I wanted to. I took it a second time and I scored 4 points higher. So I think it's really important that you take it more than once. But again, I've heard it from admissions counselors before. Anything over 3 times, it's just not looked at very well.
Awesome. So this is a question I think I love to ask our LSAT tutors who do these, because I think it's like a fresh perspective. So if you had to reapply and rewrite your LSAT, what is one thing that you would focus on improving? Like, what is one thing you would do different? What is one thing, and even any bits of advice that you can share with our audience who may be taking that in April, and if there's still time for them to improve or make some changes?
Yeah, I think just again, really, if I could take it again, I would have identified the questions that I was doing so poorly on, and work on those more. I think I fell into the category of people where if I knew I wasn't good at a type of question, I never wanted to see it ever again. I just knew that if I was good at another type of question, I wanted to make sure that I was getting all of those right all the time. And I kind of neglected like all the questions I wasn't good at, because it honestly like hurt my feelings every time I got them wrong. So I think I wish I would have spent more time looking at the questions I wasn't good at. And for me, it was reading comprehension because I'm not a very fast reader. So I wish I would have learned how to better read passages. But I think something that I wish I would have known before applying to law school, just generally, I think it would be not to limit myself. I didn't apply to any top 14 law schools at all. The highest ranked school I applied to was USC. And the reason for that being I just didn't want to get rejected from Harvard or Stanford or Yale, which is such a dumb reason. I mean, lots of people get rejected from those schools all the time, but doing that, I limited myself, I think, and I didn't even give the admissions people the option to reject me. I just already rejected myself. And I think that this can apply to everyone when they're applying, whether you want to apply to top 14 law schools, whether your goal is to get into top 50. I think you should apply to reach schools no matter what, because you really never know what they're looking for. Maybe your personal statement is just so inspiring and so amazing, and the admission person reading it resonates with your story and they want to admit you. You'll never know if you never try. Even if your LSAT score doesn't fall within their range, but your GPA does, apply. One of my students, another example of this, one of my students that I tutored, not this cycle, but the cycle before, she was certain that she was not going to get into any top law schools because she didn't have like a super high LSAT score. I think she got a 159, which is still fairly good. But she had a 3.8 GPA, and her dream school was Northwestern. And I worked on her personal statement with her and all of her supplemental essays and her resume and her letters of rec and everything. And I told her, don't count yourself out from any of those schools. Don't count yourself out from Northwestern. You never know what they're looking for this cycle. Sure enough, she applied, got into Northwestern, and now she's a 1L there. So you just you really never know what they're looking for, and that could be you.
That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's one of
Yeah.
those things that um, you're getting lots of hearts in the chat. So that's incredibly
Oh,
inspiring. Um, okay, so I think this is a really great question, not necessarily related to the LSATs, but I think it's worth discussing. Can you explain law school rankings and how it affects where you can become a lawyer?
yeah, this is a great question, and it's a question I get all the time. So, law school rankings, unfortunately, really do matter for the type of job you want to get. For example, I work in big law, which is like the top corporate law firms in the nation. And with that comes the most benefits, the highest salary in any state. So whether it's California, New York, Wisconsin, that's really, if you want to do big law, you really want to go to the highest ranked school that you can, because some firms won't even look at your application if you don't go to a top school, which again, I totally disagree with. But that's just kind of that's how it works, unfortunately. So let's say you live in New York. Um, I don't know if it's one of the better states to get admitted to the bar. It's just one of the most competitive states to get admitted to the bar. California and New York are the most competitive. Um, but if you want to practice in New York, is it important that you go to school in New York? Not necessarily. If you get into Stanford, and that's the best school that you get into, go to Stanford, even though it's in California, or go to USC, go to UCLA, because that ranking is a national ranking. It'll hold up in any state, and you can take the bar anywhere from those schools. For example, if you don't get into, let's say you don't get into one of the top ranked schools, but you get into, I'm trying to think of some New York schools, like I think Brooklyn is one of them, Brooklyn Law, Hofstra, I know is another one. And then let's say Hofstra is one of your choices and Chapman Law in California. It might not make sense to go to Chapman in California if you want to practice in New York, because both of those schools are similarly ranked. So you might want to stay in New York, make those connections there, network there, because Hofstra might have a bigger pull than Chapman, if that makes sense. So ranking really, really, really matters. And the higher ranked school you go to, doesn't matter what state it's in, go. And then you can go anywhere for work after that and take the bar anywhere, because they're going to prepare you well no matter what.
And if by chance they don't, Juris Education can. So
Yeah.
we have a couple more minutes. I think we'll be able to answer one last question. How do you handle procrastination?
It's a good question. For me personally, I mean, I am a procrastinator. I've always been a procrastinator, even with work. I'm a procrastinator. But I think for me, what works is setting a schedule, making a to-do list, something that I can physically see in front of me. If I'm studying for the LSAT and I want to get through all of reading comprehension questions, like every single category, I'll make a list of the types of categories. So this type of essay question. So 1, 2, 3, 4 to-do list. And as I get through it, I just highlight. And to me, it's so satisfying because I just get through my whole list highlighting and I'm like on a schedule. And then I feel satisfied at the end of it because I know that I achieved what I wanted to for the day or for the week or for the month. So I think making a plan is the best way to handle procrastination.
Amazing. I think this is a perfect time to wrap up tonight's discussion. Summer, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for this wonderful discussion. Thank you for just, okay, you know what? I take that back. There's one more question. Um,
Oh
Nonetheless, thank
yeah,
you.
I
Is
see
it
it.
better to get a prep course or self-study?
Yeah, great question. I personally prefer a prep course. What like a like I don't know. There's lots of companies out there that have prep courses. But
We
if
do.
oh great, yeah. If you know that you're not going to be able to have a schedule for yourself or hold yourself accountable on your own, do a prep course. But if you're okay self-studying and you know that like you can hold yourself accountable, then self-study, I guess. But I really think getting a prep course is the best way to go. Personally, that's what I would do if I was doing it again.
No,
But
that's
yeah,
a perfect
good
way to wrap
question.
up the discussion. Incredible question. Thank you to our audience. Thank you for joining us. Just so everyone knows, we do these webinars on a weekly basis. So we'll talk about different topics like the LSAT. We'll do workshops in specific aspects of the LSAT. We'll talk about admissions. We'll talk about all this awesome stuff. So if you haven't already subscribed to us on social media or our newsletter, we definitely recommend doing that because we love doing these. We love hosting these. And see, someone says I'll be in the workshop next week.
Awesome.
Very
Awesome.
awesome.
Great.
Awesome. We're looking forward to seeing you. Let me know your thoughts. Yes, I think it's a wonderful time to wrap up. Again, Summer, thank you. And we look forward to seeing everybody next week. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank
I hope,
you. Bye.
bye, everyone. Have a great evening.